But one farmer says, seems to me there was a tea party in Boston that was illegal too.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
We shall seek to establish and maintain a dollar which will not change its purchasing and debt-paying power during the succeeding generation.
As anguished shrieks rose up from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Government credit and government currency are really one and the same thing. A reserve of gold and a small reserve of silver.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
Well, some people still think it's money.
Every intro recently has featured Nixon closing the gold window, defaulting on U.S. foreign gold obligations. You've seen it. There's a lot more to the story than what we see there in that one little news clip you see here in the intros. WTF happened in 1971. What were the effects of that effort to close the gold window? We're going to get into that today and look at some of the aftershocks of that move. But before we get into today's video, because it's going to be extremely boring, a lot of slides, a lot of graphs, a lot of charts, I think some of you guys will actually get a kick out of it. I myself, I did. Now, I found these when I was just doing what I do, perusing, falling down rabbit holes, reading some articles on the topics that we cover here, doing some background research and things. And we've covered this story quite extensively in the past, but I've never seen a collection of charts like this pertaining to the aftershocks of 1971. So we're going to get into that. We've also covered this history in the past, so I'm not going to get into the why and the how and all of that with, why Nixon did what he did. What we're going to look at today really is the effects of it. And after this video, you'll see an announcement at the end there for the silver form. Go check out the silver form. There's going to be a link down below. They're friends of the channel here. Sometimes my content somehow ends up on their forums there by viewers here on the channel that participate in the silver form. They'll go over there and post videos there for conversations. They're doing a pretty cool giveaway. It's the 10-ounce Queen's Beast. So if you're a member there, go ahead and sign up for that. I myself am not a member of the forum, so I'm ineligible to win that 10-ounce beast. So I'd like to see one of the subscribers or followers or viewers here, a member of the channel here, should go over there and sign up and win that beast if you are a member of the silver forum. If not, I think you can sign up right away and then enter the giveaway for that big hefty coin. It looks like they have the last silver that's available in the physical form anyways. And we're going to talk about that at the end of this video, so it's going to be like multi-topic today. We're going to really cover this story first. We'll look at some more of the comic stuff, not as in-depth as we have recently, but again, there's some issues there that are popping up in the news. It's always worth discussing. But let's get right into WTF happened in 1971. Again, the link will be down below. I've got to give these guys a shout out and credit because, hey, I wouldn't have found all these charts if it wasn't for this little site here that featured them. It's late in the afternoon. Made myself a nice hot cup of coffee, and we're going to start looking at some charts. So don't fall asleep on me. Pay attention. There's some interesting connections to be made here this afternoon as we take a look at what the effects of government just issuing fiat and unpegging the dollar from gold has had on society as a whole, especially here in the United States. Chart number 1, growth in productivity and hourly compensation since 1948. You can see productivity there in the golden colored bar. And then you can see in compensation there is in red. There's 1972, right after 1971 there. And look at it, just boom, peters out. They were essentially paralleling each other, following each other, arm in arm, until the unpegging of gold from the US dollar. Compensation includes wages and benefits for production and non-supervisory workers. Source Economic Policy Institute. Some of the sources on these were cut off when they were screenshots, so I apologize. But that is, to me, an obvious connection to the 1971 closing of the gold window. And I think many of you, if you've been alive that long, and anyone who looks at just the standards of living and people having to take on second or third jobs, can make a connection to that last slide and realize that the currency is just not going as far, and compensation, people are not being compensated like they used to. One income one man working in a home used to be able to provide for a fairly large family and meet all of the needs back in the day without accruing debt. Nowadays, you have to have everyone in the house working, even the kids. You got to send them to coal mines, it seems like these days. Real GDP, real wages, and trade policies in the U.S. 1947 to 2014. There you can see right there, 1971, the end of Bretton Woods Agreement. And then there you go, real GDP per capita, real GDP per FTE, that's full-time equivalent worker. The average real wage GDP deflator, average real wage CPI, and the real median weekly earnings for full-time workers there, just flat. If anything, it's even decreased a little bit, the CPI. Again, all of those really much paralleling one another, arm in arm, and kind of just climbing at the same rate, staying together until 1971. Income gains widely shared in early post-war decades, the time of Bretton Woods, but not since then. Real family income between 1947 and 2016 as a percentage of the 1973 level. 95th percentile, climbing up there in the red. You get the median gray there, somewhat flat, and then blue flat and even decreasing is the 20th percentile. Again, all of these charts showing similar things. What are we seeing? We're seeing at one time, much of these measurements were tightly correlated to one another and even paralleling each other throughout these charts until that 1971 time frame. And now 1971 is, again, it's not the only date where the entire economic model of the United States was shattered. I'm sure many of you are aware, especially we've covered the history of these things multiple times, going back even to the Civil War with the Greenbacks, the Supreme Court case, Hepburn versus Griswold, when we talk about the federal war on gold. But then, of course, the founding of the Fed, that affront, that effort to central banking that took place here in the United States with the Federal Reserve notes, and then in 1933, the banning of gold, making gold contraband illegal. FDR confiscating it, even the notes, like that first bill we saw floating by earlier that was payable to the bearer on demand in gold coin. So those all led up. They were the stepping stones that led up to this, and really 1971 was when that's when it fell apart completely. And you'll see even more charts that really paint a picture of that and are a testament to what took place as a result of that. New York and Boston, these are median house prices, okay? And then that's in blue, you've got the median household income in red for New York, and then median house price Boston in yellow, and then right there you've got median household income for Boston and kind of like that, what is it, a gray or green color? I'm kind of colorblind. So look at the blue and the yellow. That's the house prices for New York and Boston just skyrocketing, 50%, 100%, 150%, 200%, 250%, just incredible growth there. Well, look at the income. Did it keep up with the house prices? No, it did not at all. Just barely, if anything, flat. And I would say that this chart probably matches up with a lot of the properties throughout both coasts, the West Coast, East Coast, and everything in between. Very similar chart pattern. I mean, let's summarize it. I mean, simply put, incomes have remained relatively flat. Housing prices have increased dramatically. I remember seeing, and I'll just make it personal, the receipts and a little notebook that my parents had. It was my grandparents had built a house. It was actually my great-grandparents built a house. And then my grandparents built the house next to them. Anyways, they had the receipts for these homes that they built. And if I remember correctly, it was like $5,000 back in the 1950s they built these homes for. Paid off, they lived in them forever. Beautiful, really well-made homes. And that was that, You can't do that today. And this was with one person working really, and they had a pretty comfortable middle-class lifestyle and income. They had nice cars, paid for, no debt, and everyone was just doing well. And this was, again, before this time period, before today, before the breakdown with Bretton Woods anyways. I was back in the 50s. I want to pause for a minute and just express that I really appreciate you guys putting up with these and sticking around for a video this boring, of this magnitude. This is not for your average ignoramus. This is not for your typical American. They don't get it. They never will. You cannot explain any of this to certain people, and they don't even want to hear it. They honestly don't. As long as they can buy their Doritos, drink their Diet Coke, get their Big Mac, and watch a sporting event that night, they don't care about any of this. They don't even want to hear it. Now, what we're seeing unfold in America, as we pause here for a moment and take a side street conversation, it's a pretty dramatic event. As a matter of fact, it's global, right? And we've talked about and touched on the normalcy bias. People were not mentally prepared, physically prepared. They were completely ill-equipped in every part of their life for what is taking place currently. That does not change the fact that the event occurred. It was unavoidable. Certain events in history, in the timeline of human existence, will be unavoidable. They will come upon you, and you will just have to deal with it, whether or not you were prepared. So, a lot of people like to put their head in the sand and ignore it. And that's a saying I think that people, it's a cliche, people just say it all the time. But truthfully, come on now, look around. People don't know, they don't care. And as a matter of fact, they think people like us are in a way weird or fringe. And if anything, they're tinfoil hatters, or they're condescending or arrogant. It's never going to happen. Oh, that can't happen to us. They blow it all off. They blow these topics off, and it's infuriating. And I sense and I get it when some of you have kind of that anger and resentment towards those types of people, and feel like, hey, they're going to get what's coming to them. And that's actually true. It's accurate. They will. They will get what's coming to them. They will see the vaporization of all of their earnings, all of their wealth, all of their savings. And they will most likely end up in a fairly destitute state as a result of not taking heed or paying attention to this type of history, this type of reality that exists. And there's nothing we can do about that. We can try to educate certain people. I think there is a profound reason why this type of material, when it comes to economics and the economic history, the role of money with humans, and how it just the whole story, the story of it, just in the United States alone, why it is so blatantly ignored in every grade, even through college. I mean, you have people graduating with masters and PhDs in all different studies that have never touched on any of these materials. They have no concept of the Coinage Act of 1792 or everything since then, everything that we've talked about here for the last, 10 years now. Now, this is an important chart, so let's get back to this story here. Let's get back to it. We're all over the place today. These are hyperinflation episodes, going back to about 1916, right around there. So, essentially World War I. Now, your average booger eater window licker would not know what was taking place back then. They don't care. Again, they don't know any date outside of the date they were pretty much born. So you've got in the pale blue there, the first ones you see. These are Versailles, Genoa, World War I. Okay, and you can see these are hyperinflationary events. It makes sense that they took place during a wartime period. Again, those nations mass printing currency and printing more than they had in gold, so destroying the currency by effect. And there's a little cluster. You can see that cluster of hyperinflationary events taking place in nations like Austria, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Russia. All of those in that World War I cluster. And then you go up to the World War II and the founding of Bretton Woods. That's the next kind of, it's in another bluish type color if my eyes aren't deceiving me. You've got Hungary in red, and that means it was hourly. Severe hyperinflation taking place there. And there's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hyperinflation clusters there in that World War II time period. Now let's go to the breakdown of Bretton Woods. Okay, Nixon closing the gold window. Now, so let's just, for the sake of this chart, we'll get into a little more detail on what that meant. When Bretton Woods took place, essentially they pegged the dollar to gold, and then all of the other countries in the world would peg their currencies to the dollar. So by effect, essentially pegging their dollar to gold, or their currency, whatever it was, whether it was the krona, the pound, the yen, yuan, all those currencies had to be pegged to the dollar. They had to have dollars in reserves to issue currencies, and that was the whole Bretton Woods agreement. When Nixon unpegged the dollar from gold and would no longer allow gold to leave the U.S. Treasury in payment of foreign obligations, he would only allow them to take dollars. They created an environment in which all the currencies would float against the dollar as the reserve currency that the United States held and could print at will. But there was no gold backing anything anymore, not even the dollar. Nothing could be exchanged or redeemed for gold. No countries could do that. Now remember, 1933 to 71, or 74, gold was illegal to be owned by peasants, serfs, knaves, plebes, you and me. But governments could still transact with it in banks, and they still did until 71. 71 was a breakdown completely. That's when no currency, no government could redeem anything, any paper for gold whatsoever. And look at the cluster of hyperinflationary events and episodes that took place since then. It's obviously much more. The list of countries, I don't see how they line up very well, but you've got just a significant number, almost essentially every country up there that can be named, minus a few, experienced hyperinflationary events post-Bretton Woods breakdown, post-1971. More material we've covered before. We've shown this in multiple charts and graphs. And again, this is all major currencies have depreciated over the past century relative to gold. All of them. Value in gold as of December, this is of 2016. Gold being the constant. However, look at the red arrow there. That's 1971. All of them falling off essentially a cliff at that point. Gold being that the 100 mark, just the solid gold bar up there. Doesn't change in value, but the currencies fluctuate in value to it. US dollar, the mark, the Reichsmark, the Deutschmark, the European currency unit, the euro, the yen, the pound sterling, all of them falling to essentially near zero, losing 98% to 100% of their value compared to gold. I don't pay too much attention to Robert Kiyosaki. I don't read his materials. I'm not really into the whole rich dad, poor dad thing. I think it's kind of not going to get into it. Anyways, I did read something today that was actually surprising to me. He is into gold. The guy said, hey, when you get your stimulus money, buy gold, silver, and Bitcoin with it. And he said he was talking about, and I read a little article where he was interviewed by Kitco. Even there was a lot of material on him out there because I followed a rabbit hole today on some of his materials because I was blown away that he actually talked about gold. I didn't know that about him. And he reminisced on when he bought his first Krugerrand, and he admits in the article he broke the law, contraband. This was before 1974, so before you could legally own gold in the United States. He was in Taiwan, and he bought a Krugerrand for $50, 1 ounce of gold, and he smuggled it back into the United States. Again, it was illegal to own gold at that time. Now that Krugerrand is worth $1,700, and he bought it back, before 1974. I think he bought it in 71, 72, 73, somewhere in that range, but it was before 74 when they allowed citizens in the United States to again own physical bullion. And he talked about gold in a very favorable way, so I kind of gave him a little more respect in my eyes for him. And he talked very favorably about gold, silver, and Bitcoin. And he mentioned again what he's going to do with, I don't see how he was going to get any stimulus money because he's a quite wealthy individual. But he mentioned using any stimulus money you get with what's coming down the pipe right now and putting it into those three areas only: gold, silver, and Bitcoin. So there, you heard it from him, the rich dad, poor dad guy, Kiyosaki. That's what he says there. I have a couple other avenues I would take with the stimulus money. If you didn't want to buy gold, silver, or Bitcoin, the only other things I would buy with it would be, guns and ammo and magazines, because they are also somewhat inflation proof. And if anything, not only are they inflation proof, but there's a high probability that at some point you will not be able to get those things or those items any longer in the future. Here's a pretty important chart. Income growth from 1917 to 2012. Red is the top 1%. Okay, so the 1% of earners. And then the bottom 90% is the green, or the grayish green. Again, I'm colorblind. So there you can see right where the gold arrow is, August 1971, Nixon ends the U.S. gold standard. Now look at the bottom 90%, the you, the me, the peasant, the plebe, the serfs, the knaves. We experienced a really comfortable income growth, especially from about 1940 to about 1970. A much more significant income growth even than the top 1% earners. The top 1%, they just earned what they earned, but they were still wealthy. But the lower and middle classes were doing pretty well when it came to wage growth and income. Then 1971 comes, Nixon ends the gold standard. What happens? It goes flat and even negative. Wages have not gone up since then. They've gone down, if anything. And the standard of living, I would argue, has decreased dramatically for those in the 90%, the bottom. But look now at the top 1%. It didn't kick up immediately. It did a little bit, but not significantly. Right around the 1980s. Of course, all the little investment vehicles on Wall Street, right? Those boys, all those little packages and things that they were coming up with, the schemes, the Ponzi schemes, the casino of Wall Street. Look at that now. The top 1% skyrocket. 100%, 150%, 200%, 250%. They're probably getting close to 300% now because, again, this chart's going back to 2012. So the top 1% really taking the lion's share of everything that they can and getting much more income growth than those of us in the peasant classes, because that's truly what we are. We're the pitchfork clutching peasants. And again, the gold standard, it's been argued in the past, really does help. It protects the savings of the pensioners, the elderly, those that just saved their whole lives, because their currency doesn't get destroyed. And if anything, this chart might not even take into account the fact that savings for the 90% earners gets destroyed over time, and therefore they lose even more wealth just because of inflation. And inflation essentially benefits the 1% because they get it first. They're able to spend it first during their financial, in those huge financial entities, the banks and the financial institutions and Wall Street. If you know how the tap works, when the government spigot turns on, it's the guys closest to it that are able to spend that money before the inflationary effects on prices occur further down the line in the economy. It's kind of difficult doing these videos with just charts up. I got to tell you, it's hard to come up with all the things that we want to talk about, but at the same time, it is somewhat entertaining and fun. I know you guys are getting a kick out of it, those of you that aren't falling asleep. This is the number of countries with banking crises. Now, it goes all the way back to 1800, of course. Some people would blame some of those on gold. A lot of it was government intervention, the fights for central banking. There was a lot of things taking place with the robber barons, especially in the United States and abroad. There was always corruption. Humans are always doing different things, trying to get control. And of course, there was disruptions in the price fixing of metals and the rate at which silver and gold were exchanged, which would create gold and silver flows around the world that would disrupt economies. That's a whole other story. But Bretton Woods, when it did occur and when people were abiding by it, it seemed to really put a pause on the number of countries with a banking crisis. Now, when it broke down and he ended it in 71, snapped the fingers, it spiked again, and it's a lot more dramatic and a lot more significant when it came to the number of countries that were experiencing a banking crisis than really any time before, dating back to 1800. So we're seeing a lot more of them, a lot more frequent. And the only pause you can see there, where there wasn't as many, very few even, was during that time when the dollar was more pegged to gold and the exchange rate with it with other currencies. Here is income inequality in the United States. The top decile share in U.S. national income dropped from 45 to 50% in the 1910s and 20s to less than 35% in the 1950s. This is the fall documented by Kuznets. It then rose from from less than 35% in the 1970s to 45 to 50% in the 2000s, 2010s. And you can really see it take place there. Look at the income inequality dropped during the Bretton Woods period, essentially. And then when we went to pure fiat money, off the charts. It's up again. Income concentration at the top has risen sharply since the 1970s. The share of total before-tax income flowing to the highest income households, including capital gains, 1913 to 2017. And you can see it there, the top 1% really getting a much bigger portion of it, and then the top 0.5% also getting a much larger portion. So the income concentration ending up at the top. And of course, if you look at the marker there for 1971, boom, it was kind of a trough there, and it's been rising ever since then. Now here's an interesting chart, U.S. net wealth shares. Look at the bottom 90%, climbing from about the 1930-ish range. The bottom 90% really getting a significant portion, up to 35% of the U.S. net wealth shares. And then you've got the bottom, or the top, sorry, the bottom line, there, the goldish colored one, top 0.1%. They were less, declining, up until 1971. And then what do you see there? The bottom 90% decreasing U.S. net wealth shares, and then the top 0.1% increasing their U.S. net wealth shares. And, of course, the convergence point where the two lines are going to meet eventually, talking about the emergence of populism. And, of course, we do see that taking place in the political sphere and around the country and around the world even, in the era of populism. This is the federal debt held by the public. Look at that now. Of course, the wars increased it. Civil War, World War I, Great Depression, World War II. 1971, breakdown of Bretton Woods. There you have the percentage of GDP federal debt held by the public off the charts, really exploding in right about the mid-1990s, and then really skyrocketing again after the financial crisis of 08 and 2010 there, going up. Gross federal debt held by the public as a percent of gross domestic product. The gray areas are U.S. recessions. There's 1971, where the red arrow is pointing. And then as you can see, really ever since then, we've been climbing. The gross federal debt held by the public as a percent of the GDP just rising significantly. And we're sitting in, well, this chart kind of only dates to 2010. I believe it goes up to about 2015 is where we're ending off, where it peters off on the chart there. And it looks like it's over 70, right around 80% of the GDP. You want to talk about debt? Here's all sectors: debt, securities, loans, and liability. There's 1971. It's the red arrow pointing down again. And the red graph line you see there is the GDP, gross domestic product. And the blue one being the all sectors, debt and securities, loans, and liabilities. I mean, look at it. Just look at it. Off the charts. How many times have we said off the charts in this video? Everything's off the charts. It's off the charts. When you eliminate gold from the economy and remove it as money, you're going to go off the charts. You're going to go off the deep end eventually. And it's going to cause some serious problems, as we've seen and we are seeing. We're witnessing and living through it. I don't remember the exact quote from Henry Ford. I believe it was Henry Ford who said something like, if the American people knew how banking and the system was working, or not working for that matter, I'm paraphrasing, he said there'd be a revolution tomorrow. And of course, they don't know. The people are just too stupid. This is the U.S. national debt, 1900 to 2020. I mean, do I need to explain it to you? Really, take a look at it. Look at it. Look at where's it. Find 1971 on there. You see it? Pretty much right in the middle. And then there's the U.S. national debt. And then this is measured in trillions of dollars. Does it look like it's slowing down? Does it look like they're going to arrest this, correct it, stop it? Do you think it'll ever go down? Absolutely not. You're an idiot and a buffoon if you think so. And you're also an idiot and a buffoon if you think this is good. No. The economy's dead. We're witnessing it. It's unraveling. It's on fire. It's burning. It's being destroyed. And these charts are evidence of that. And this chart alone is absolutely evidence of that. The New Deal Bretton Woods suspension of the gold standard. Federal surplus or deficit as a percent of gross domestic product. You can see it there. The little green areas are where they had a surplus, very few. And then the red areas are when there was a deficit. As you can see there, quite a lot more deficits, especially since 1971. You can see it kind of paused there. There were some good surplus years during the initial phase of Bretton Woods, the 50s there. And then the 60s, it wasn't too bad. They weren't accruing as much debt. 71, of course, the suspension of the gold standard, and it gets a lot redder and stays deeper for longer. And there's really only one supposedly surplus year. And then, of course, much deeper red going forward, and that will just continue. Of course, the deepest red you see there is during the war years, the 1940s, World War II. Federal surplus or deficit. Again, look how flat that is from pre-1910 all the way up to about 1970. And then, of course, what we've been talking about here, and there you see it just go to heck. Just goes to heck there. Post-1971. Federal deficits ever since then. We've also seen a complete erosion and destruction of the U.S. savings rate. Most people right now can't even come up with $400 if you ask them to. So the savings rate is gone, and even those, if they are saving any money, the dollars they are saving are being destroyed and eroded by inflation and by the destruction of the currency itself. And please don't be one of those inflation deniers. Please, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. They exclude the items from the baskets of goods and services that they don't wish to include because it would expose the true inflation and the CPI and everything. We all know that they play funny number games and that they do not allow certain data to be included because it would show what's taking place. Believe me, anyone who shops, buys groceries, and pays bills, and lives as a peasant knows that the currency's not buying as much. If you can't take $1 and go buy yourself a steak, dinner, and a beer, you're experiencing inflation. You've experienced it. It's happening because you used to be able to do that. The currency's been destroyed. Don't argue otherwise. You're an idiot if you do. The dollar has decreased in its purchasing power over 99% since the elimination of gold from it. So please. Anyways, net savings as a percentage of gross national income. Again, people are not saving money. You could show chart after chart, all testifying to that. People are not able to save. How clear is this? U.S. merchandise trade balance in 1895 to 2015. Look at that. Trade balance was solid for the percent of GDP for the entire history of the country until the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And then there you go. Trade balance goes to heck. That's unbelievable. There goes the U.S. jobs. How many U.S. jobs have left this country since 1971? What happened to the steel industry, the textile mills, all the production, everything being made in the USA? Just think of that for a moment. How many of your relatives have lost their jobs because of this? Your government, Nixon, the Treasury, the Fed, those crooks in D.C., all of them, every person who's ever been in Congress, every single one of them. They destroyed your family's ability to save, your dynastic family wealth, your income, your quality of life. All of it was destroyed by politicians, and there is absolutely no way they can explain it otherwise. And here you go. The United States goods trade balance. The little red circle there you see, that's 1971, August, closing the gold window. And what happens to the chart after that? Negative 8,000. There you go. United States goods trade balance absolutely destroyed by the breakdown of Bretton Woods. Thank you, Nixon. Thank you, Washington. Now, this disruption in household income and savings and the financial strains and stresses that it put on the family unit caused divorces. You know, we had to put women in the workplace, in the workforce. There had to be more incomes in order to survive. And, well, there's a lot of societal issues that came out of that and were born out of that, whether you want to believe it or not. And so we saw a rise since 1971, a dramatic rise. And now there's other societal factors as well. You know, we saw the the movement that took place in the 60s and 70s, the free love movement, the hippie movement, everyone becoming, you know what I'm talking about, crazy, the whole drugs, sex, and rock and roll lifestyle. And then we've got a skyrocketing divorce rate for pretty much all ages, other than really it looks like the 18 to 34-year-olds. However, we did see an uptick in 1971. And I will agree that there are some socioeconomic, demographic factors that might play into these more societal charts and these social charts that we're looking at now. However, you have to be able to make the correlation that there is a connection as well with the closing of the gold window and the destruction of the economy as a result. So this is the incarceration rate of inmates incarcerated under state and federal jurisdiction per 100,000 of population, 1925 to 2014. And there's 1971. This chart, it is a little far-reaching in my opinion. I do make the connection because, look, follow me here. This was also during the height of the war on drugs. And we saw what that did. Complete and utter total failure since day one. But a lot of those youth that were unemployed on the streets couldn't find work that paid very well or do anything to make the ends meet, turned to crime or turned to the selling of drugs in that world in order to make money. They also came from broken homes where the fathers had problems or the mothers. There was all kinds of reasons. A lot of them might have been able to be tied to economic disruptions as a result of destruction of currency. Now, can we go that far as to say that? I'm sure there are some cases that would point to that, and I know some people could argue either side of this. However, it is interesting to look at a chart and see that, especially when you overlay it with the backdrop of all of the other ones we've looked at and discussed thus far. This is the share of 25 to 29-year-olds living with parents or grandparents. And there you can see 1971, pretty low, and it's been rising ever since then. Now, there's a lot, again, in this chart, societal-wise. I know of several towns, one of them I used to live in, where the youth can no longer afford real estate at all. It's impossible. They cannot purchase homes. It's very difficult to even rent them. So there is a lot of cohabitation with relatives and even roommates. I have a cousin. He's an older guy. He's in his 40s. And up until recently, this guy's never owned a home, purchased a home. He's been in apartments his whole life. And he was sharing a home with his girlfriend. And the two of them lived in one room with 5 other roommates, all of those roommates living in another room. And so he basically had 5 or 6 different individuals, not related, all paying rent for one house. That's how high the rent was in this particular region and area. So again, this is just this chart showing us the share of 25 to 29-year-olds living with parents or grandparents. A lot of reasons for that. They either can't get jobs, they can't get jobs that pay enough, they can't get out on their own, they can't make it with the jobs that are out there. Again, there's the arrow pointing to 1971, and you can see it rising since then. Some people would be quick to point out that, oh, well, it was really high before 1971 also. True, but it was dropping dramatically. It was dropping dramatically before that, from the 40s to 70s. And I would argue that before that, during the peak there, pre-1940 even, we had a lot more agrarian society, a lot more agricultural-based society here in the United States. You had a lot of family farms, a lot of people that lived perhaps on the same farm, but in different domiciles, different structures. But you might have a father and his wife, and then the son might be in his 20s with his wife living also on the same agricultural plot and also helping with the farm to take it over soon. There's nothing wrong with communal living or living with your relatives or near them. I think it's actually healthy and better for society, as a matter of fact. I think people are too dispersed nowadays, and they've destroyed families in that way. Here's interest rates. You can see it spike during the Volcker years and then just plummet and drop ever since then. And as you know, we're sitting at near 0% interest rates currently. And being such a debtor nation, as a result of having a currency that's been destroyed, they can't afford to raise interest rates at all. If they raise interest rates, it kills the economy. So they just keep them at 0. Now they want to go to negative. They're actually trying to go negative. And on top of that, they have to give everybody free money just to keep the economy going. They have to helicopter money to people all the time now and just mail people checks and deposit people money and just give it out like candy because the economy is that dead. Oh, bear with me, guys. We're almost through this. Come on, stay awake. Bear with me. Here's long-term government bond yields, the 10-year for Japan, the U.S., Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. So long-term government bond yields. You can see them, 1965 to 1970, rising from about 2.5%, 3, 4, 5% up to 7.5%, almost 8%, 9%, some of those ranges there. It spiked up there in the 1980s, and then it's been dropping ever since then, and now you can't get diddly squat for a government bond. They're not worth anything. So that's what happened after 1971. All those charts kind of paint the picture. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation there. Let's take a look quickly. We'll touch on it again in a moment, but I wanted to mention the COMEX gold stocks. Again, we talked about that. We've done 2 videos on the COMEX defaulting. I do believe they did. I believe that they're playing word games at this point. Here's some headlines just discussing it. It's all over the news. Still, there is discussion about disruptions and problems, disconnections in the gold market. And I only want to read one line out of this. COMEX gold stocks surge as price premium sucks metal to New York. Check this out. Of around 200,000 contracts for April delivery active on March 23rd when prices on COMEX began to rise sharply above spot gold, around 25,000, equivalent to 2.5 million ounces, have been taken to delivery, according to CME data. 2.5 million ounces. That concludes today's video. Go check out the silver forum, like I mentioned earlier at the beginning, so you can get in on trying to win this 10-ounce silver Queen's Beast. I would like to win it, but I don't sign up for forums that often, and I can't enter anything because anytime I enter anything, I won't win it. So to me, it's just not even worth my time. It is a beautiful coin. It's hefty, nice 10-ounce silver coin. Good luck to all of you out there. I hope somebody from this channel can win that. It'd be pretty cool. So thanks for tuning in. I appreciate all of you that contribute, like, share, subscribe, and participate down in the comments. And those of you who can participate during the premieres, it's always appreciated. So many of you have shown an incredible amount of support for this channel, and it's humbling. We appreciate it dearly. And I thank each and every one of you that is there for this channel and appreciates what we do also. It's recognized. I see what you guys do, and every single one of you that has participated in contributing to the well-being of this channel is dear to us. So thanks again. I hope this was in some way valuable, some of the information here. I know it was absolutely dry. I mean, this was too dry. You couldn't even grow a cactus in this video. It was that dry. Some of the most boring of productions that we've done in a while, but that's what charts are. That's why that's why I steer clear of them. I can't do chart videos. I hate them. I hate charts. I don't like looking at them. I like the history. I like the discussing certain things. I like looking at the gold coins and talking about that. I don't really like the whole economic numbers games that they play, but it is important, I guess. It did tell a story. As dry as it was, I think these charts really do help paint that picture of what's taken place since 1971. And I hope it helped some of you understand it more clearly. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.